Okay. So good evening. My name is Donna Schneider, president of the Prince George's County Historical Society, and I'd like to thank you for joining the Prince George's County Historical Society for our Monday, February 26, 2024 History Chat, Stories of Lakeland and College Park, Maryland. We'd like to welcome our members, and we definitely appreciate your support. If you are not a member, think about becoming a member through our website, www.pghistory.org. We will be recording the chat, so please mute your microphones. And we will be posting the chat on our YouTube channel, which can be found also on our website. We will be taking questions and answers at the end of the chat, so please put any questions you may have in the meeting chat, and we will get to as many of them as possible. So tonight's chat is with Maxine and John Peter Thompson, who will talk about the challenges of a community in the shadows of the University of Maryland during the time of segregation, and about how family and community relationships made Lakeland strong. They'll talk about outside pressures brought to bear on the community. While it strengthened the community, much harm and damage was also caused to the heart of the community when well-intentioned programs such as urban renewal wreaked havoc on Lakeland. Just a little bit about our guest tonight. Maxine Gross is a fifth-generation member of College Park's historic African-American community, Lakeland, and is a founding chairperson of the Lakeland Community Heritage Project. Is also chairperson.
I know. I mean, like, I feel like I've been truly observing Black history.
Please mute your microphones. Sorry. And occasionally, let's see, she is also chairperson of College Park's Restorative Justice Commission, excuse me. And occasionally you may see her byline in College Park Here and Now. So thank you for joining us, Ms. Gross, and John Peter, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Donna. And thank you, Maxine, for joining me tonight for this chat. I am excited and delighted to have you as a guest and to learn about Lakeland. And my first sort of introductory question is, could you describe for our listeners who may not be familiar with the area, where exactly is Lakeland?
Well, I'll first say, John Peter, thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you all this evening. Lakeland is adjacent to the University of Maryland, just across Route 1. So there's University of Maryland property just adjacent to us and across the road as well. I don't know if you're familiar with Campus Drive. That used to be called Paint Branch Parkway. We are just on the other side of that area and across from Northgate. If you're at all familiar with the College Park Community Center or Paint Branch Elementary School, both of those facilities are within the Lakeland community. I'll also add that if you've ever been to Lake Artemisia Park, then you've been to Lakeland.
Maxine, Lakeland's in the town of College Park. When is the first reference? When were the first homes built in Lakeland? And can you sort of start with a little early history and why did Lakeland come into existence? And I'm particularly, of course, interested in, well, we're going back to the time of Jim Crow and segregation, just to set the boundaries here. A little bit of the very earliest history of Lakeland as you know it. And then I'm going to let you tell the whole story.
Oh my. We don't have that kind of time, but I can try to pick up a few high points. The Lakeland community was subdivided by a gentleman by the name of Edwin Newman. He was a European American businessman out of Washington, D.C. And he had the concept of having a community that was built around a lake. The lake was he named Lake Artemisia in honor of his wife. So that happened 1890 is when the area was subdivided. Oral history tells us that there were African Americans in the area at the time, but not within the community of Lakeland as Newman envisioned it. He was selling land in his new community to European Americans, and we've not been able to find any record of Newman ever selling property to African Americans. So there was some success as Lakeland as an as a European American community until about 1900. About that time, there are newspaper reports of some mysterious fires that took place, and they describe the fires of having been lit by the colored of the area, because the theory was that the colored were displeased because they weren't being permitted to purchase or rent property within Lakeland. To go back just a little bit, I did say that the area was subdivided in 1890. There are newspaper reports from about 1890 until the early 1900s of a lot of things going on in Lakeland. It was a busy European American community with dances going on and a very robust group of people who were a part of the Democratic Party, which was at the time, of course, very similar to the Republican Party that we know today in a whole lot of ways. So you really don't read in those early newspaper articles anything about African Americans in the area until you get to about 1900. Right around that time, there are articles about suspected case of I believe it was smallpox among one of the colored of the area. And there are, early reports about, somebody being accused of stealing chickens, and that kind of thing. Around a little bit later, around 1903, we know that there were a fair number of African Americans in the area. If you look at the 1900 census, it's the community is primarily European American, but there are a few African Americans that have started to move in. Then there are articles about, the mysterious burning of homes. One story was in the newspaper that it was the coloreds that had burned the houses because they weren't being allowed to move into the neighborhood. Oral history tells us that it was pretty much the opposite, that the European Americans were burning their houses so that African Americans couldn't move in and that they'd be able to get the insurance money. The newspaper reports kind of lean to that, not by what they say, but that one of the telltale signs was the fact that all of the properties that burned were insured. So the African American community began to, around 1900, it continued to grow through this century. By about 1920, there was a very, very small European American community within Lakeland, probably one or two households. So by 1903, there was a school established for African Americans, and there were two churches. Both of those congregations still exist today. First Baptist Church, which was initially known as First Baptist Church of Lakeland. Now it's known as First Baptist Church of College Park, and that's on Lakeland Road. And Embry AME Chapel, which is now known as Embry AME Church, and that is across from First Baptist, also on Lakeland Road. So by 1920, there's, a very established community. In addition to this, the elementary school, the community worked together to have a new elementary school built through Rosenwald funds. And a few years later, there was a high school that was built along with support from the other Route 1 African American communities. And that was Lakeland High School, that was in place from 1928 until 1950. And so during that period of time, Lakeland students were able to go to school within the community from first grade all the way through high school. And because there were so few African American high schools, all of the African Americans in the region went to Lakeland High School. So if you get people of a certain age, you can pretty much guarantee that they're familiar with Lakeland and the Lakeland families. So I think that's enough of a start.
Oh, no, I
If
think,
you have questions,
I think that's great. Let me ask what I hope is an answerable question. Is the First Baptist Church building that the church meets in now, is that at the original site? Is that the original building?
no, actually, both congregations, the oral history tells us that they were at other locations first in in more flood-prone areas of the community, and that they later moved to the sites where they are now. Um, so it's a little unclear with Embry Church as to whether or not their original building is included in the structure that they have now. Um, there's a lot of newspaper articles about a building, a new church, well, not a new church, but extensive building project at Embry around 1920. But it's not really clear as to whether they were building on to the original structure or whether they were building anew. We do know that for First Baptist, though, in the 1950s, they did build a new structure. And the interesting story behind that is that they had a new pastor come to the church. And one of the, well, two defining things about this person was, one, he was a young man, and that he was a bricklayer by trade. And after, looking at the condition of the church building, he came to the conclusion that it was really necessary to build a new structure. And given that he was skilled in the building trades, as were some of the other leaders of the church, they made the decision that they were going to build a new structure for themselves. And so Reverend Covington, working very closely with a gentleman by the name of James Claiborne and also Harold Pitts, and they built, along with other parishioners, but those were that was a core group that built the church that now stands on Lakeland Road. Another kind of interesting thing about Mr. Pitts and Mr. Claiborne were that they came to the area in order to take part in one of the works programs that took place during the Depression. There was a CCC camp in Beltsville. And I think there were, if I understand it properly, there were basically mirror camps, one for white, one for black. And those two gentlemen came to the area, met two nice young ladies, and were convinced to stay on and make their homes in the area. They settled in Lakeland and really were significant members of the community, throughout their lives. One big, I guess, concern or challenge for Lakelanders was around housing. Lakeland was sited in an area that's significantly flood prone. Some areas of the community had worse problems than others. The area, particularly between Route 1 and Rhode Island Avenue, flooded fairly regularly. And people's homes were damaged because of that, consistent flooding those consistent flooding incidences. Also, because it was an African American community, folks were challenged with housing simply because of, forces of economics. Of course, you know that people doing the same work, African American versus European American, weren't afforded the same salaries. And then also the types of work that folks were able to get was significantly different. So if if you need to repair your roof and your income is lower than someone else's, that doesn't have an impact on the cost of the shingles and lumber. So one way that Lakelanders, were able to meet their needs is by coming together and having folks that, this person knows a little bit about carpentry. He'll give me a hand, at least get me started on the job. And then my brother and I will try to finish up the work. If so they work together, and those gentlemen, use those same kinds of skills and the same types of arrangements in order to build the church. I'll go back again to talk about Mr. Newman. Part of the reason that his grand plans for a European community built around a lake that would allow people to summer and have their weekends away from the city, one of the big reasons it didn't prosper was, because folks found out that a large part of the area was prone to flooding. And because European Americans had other options, they simply sold out and left. But a lot more simply moved out and rented their property to African Americans who had less option, as where they could live. Up until the 1970s, it was nearly impossible for African Americans in the area to settle anywhere other than what were established as African American communities. Usually, if you find someone living elsewhere, it's because of some type of employment arrangement. Either they're living, there's a gentleman, I believe, who lived in College Park, an Old Town area, but he was living on premise for his employer. And most of the stories in the area are similar.
I now have so many questions, and in my mind, I know I'm jumping around a little bit. You've mentioned the floodplain, and I know this becomes a significant impact on Lakeland and redevelopment and the taking of land, etc. Should we talk about that now, or should we talk about, I'm also interested in some of the stories of the homes built by your family, and I'm not sure which direction we should go first.
Well, let's go first to talk about the whole issue around flooding.
Okay.
Okay, so of course Lakeland predates the establishment of Lakeland and the other communities, Berwyn, Old Town, that became College Park, predate the municipality. The municipality came into place in 1945. And I'm not quite sure, and there were a few different attempts to build to build College Park as a municipality. But this one began by good old Curly Bird. I don't really know his rationale behind that, but I'd be really curious to know what he had in mind. But In 1945, there was the proposal for this new municipality. The proposal was that a number of different communities, including Berwyn, Lakeland, what's now North College Park, Calvert Hills, others would become part of this new municipality. The state required that there be a referendum for the residents to make a decision as to whether or not this is something they wanted to happen. There were a couple of different areas. In North College Park area wasn't particularly thrilled. I think the vote there was fairly close. The folks in the Old Town area were all for it. So were residents of most of the rest of the proposed municipality. Residents in Lakeland voted vastly in opposition to becoming part of the city of College Park. And the vote was, I don't remember the numbers exactly, but I think it was 175 to 9. So there were very few people who were who wanted this to happen. In fact, there's a newspaper report that talks about an attorney from Washington. His name is Houston. Mr. Houston was the first dean of the law school at Howard University and is well known for his work in civil rights. That he represented Lakeland at one of the public meetings, and he gave the reasoning for Lakelanders not wishing to be part of the municipality, and by saying that it would be an economic burden for them. Another report in the Greenbelt newspaper, the Co-operator, stated that it was a rumor among the colored in Lakeland that the whole concept of a municipality was simply a ruse to take away their lakefront property. So that was 1945. So fast forward into the 1970s, that land was taken by the city, along with the area from Rhode Island Avenue to Route 1. When Lakeland became part of the city, one of the things that they did early on was to do an assessment of the town. And one of the conclusions was that Lakeland was a detriment to the town as a whole because the property values in Lakeland were significantly less than those in the rest of the city. Well, at that point, the town. So there was conversation, about, what should be done about this. In the meantime, the city instituted housing regulations. Of course, many of the houses within Lakeland were self-built or old, and they didn't meet the city's requirements for, modern housing. And so for a significant period of time, from about 1945 until the mid-1960s, it was pretty much a question of benign neglect. The city, most of our streets weren't paved. Those that were paved were blacktopped. There weren't sidewalks. Some of the homes, didn't have running water. So the city, the conversation was, these houses don't meet our standards. And so, what do we do? And folks knew that whenever the city would start to enforce the housing regulations, a lot of the houses would not, were in danger of being condemned. And so there was also the problem of some of the houses flooding on a regular basis simply because of where they were located. And a solution to that was proposed to Lakeland community was urban renewal. The whole concept was questionable or somewhat controversial, well, very controversial within the neighborhood itself, because by that time people had seen what had happened in other parts of the country, in that the proposals were made and assurances were made to the communities as to a redevelopment plan that would suit the needs of the community that was in place. But in reality, what happened was that people were displaced. The majority of Lakelanders were convinced that city government was doing this for their benefit. They were assured that redevelopment would be done in a staged fashion where residents would be able to move from one part of the community to another on a temporary basis, and then move into new housing that would meet their needs. Unfortunately, the whole process took much longer than was stated, and the development plan changed significantly from one that was agreed upon by Lakelanders to one that a specific developer proposed and implemented with the city's backing. So it just, the plan that was agreed upon wasn't what was put in place. A large part of the change in plans took place after the homes had been demolished. So at the end, there was an opportunity for Lakelanders, supposedly, to say, no, we don't want this redevelopment. But by then, the vast majority of the homes that were going to be demolished had already been demolished, and the people had already been displaced from the community. So at that point, folks really felt like they didn't have any viable options.
Maxine, when let's see, I'm assuming under this redevelopment, the government comes in and offers some kind of payment for the owner's land, probably not a lot of money. Is that how this worked?
It
or did
did.
they just see? And then, so the land that was seized and the houses that, what is that land now? Did they build new housing or what happened?
Well, a portion of it, the area from the area from the railroad tracks east is Lake Artemisia Natural Area. So it's park land.
But that was housing, or a portion of it was residential at one point.
There were a number of houses there, yes.
Yeah, all right. And that's on the east side of the trolley car line, the train tracks.
It's the east. It's the east side of the railroad tracks and the metro. So the metro came later, after the homes had been demolished and the land had been sitting for a number of years. The crazy part about it is the land was supposed to have been redeveloped. It wasn't. The developer that was selected to ultimately to build didn't want, the public statement is that they didn't want the land on the east side of the railroad tracks. So it was just left. The houses had been demolished, so the land just sat there for a number of years. Then in the late 1980s, so the people moved out around 1975. In the 1980s, a gentleman he was a engineer from Metro. His name was Johann Sitkar. He came to the College Park City Council with a revolutionary idea. And his idea was that the Metro needed gravel for ballast to build up for the Metro line. And they had made this momentous discovery that the material that they needed was on that property on the east side of the railroad tracks, which, was Lakeland. And their proposal was that Metro would take the land that was doing nothing and harvest the gravel that was there, build the Metro, then redevelop the property as parkland and give it back to the people, by giving it over to park and planning as parkland. Now, if anybody knows, and I'm going to tell you, I didn't know this, but if for those people who know about building of trains, you know that it's very common practice to seek the materials that you need for building a train, a train line along the route of that line. That's exactly what had happened in the 1870s, I believe, when they built the CSX line, B&O Railroad, which is now the CSX line. And that's how the lake that was there that Newman found in 1890, that's what that hole in the ground is that he found. It's where the gravel had been retrieved to build the B&O Railroad. So if anybody, from what I've learned since then, it's an extremely common practice. So anyone with knowledge of building of train lines would have, as a matter of course, looked at the records that, the maps that show gravel deposits, or even just look along the line of the train and see that hole in the ground and know what had happened. So some people have theorized that that was the plan right along. The original plans for Metro date back to the 1960s. So
Sure.
it was a proposal, that early. So
Maxine,
it really isn't, far-fetched.
let me get, because I now realize that we only have a short amount of time. So we've got, well, because I'm fascinated by this, it just dawned on me some other things up the B&O track. Of course, that's what's going on, but that's a little off the topic, so I won't lead both of us down up north on the B&O. What happens on the west side of the track to the western part of Lakeland? What did new housing get built?
So the urban renewal plan looked at Lakeland in 3 different areas. One area they called the Clearance Area East, which is the area we were talking about on the east side of the railroad tracks. Another area was called Clearance Area West, and that was the area from Rhode Island Avenue to Route 1, Baltimore Avenue. So all of that was demolished. And so you have things there like Parkside Apartments, which caters to students. You have Spelman House, which is for Section 8 for elderly and disabled people. There is a small market rate townhouse development, and that's also student housing. And there is a townhouse development, which is Section 8.
And that
So-
was part of the African-American Lakeland community before redeveloped.
Yes.
There were residential houses there.
Yes. In
Yes.
fact, that area of Lakeland was the most densely populated area. Also, right on Route 1, there was also a small mobile home community that catered to European Americans. But the vast majority, like that was right on Route 1. But the vast majority, the rest of the community was African American.
And so the third part is what remains of residential Lakeland today. Is
The area that was known as the conservation area, which is from Rhode Island Avenue to the railroad tracks. The challenge with that is that because of general gentrification and the problems with the University of Maryland and their decisions about not housing their students on campus, there's extreme pressure around houses being converted to rentals and the lack of the lack of policing of regulations around renting to more than 5 people. The county has a regulation that only 5 people can rent in a single family home. That's completely disregarded. So it's not uncommon for houses to be purchased by prospective landlords and 5 or so additional bedrooms being added. So you have like houses with like 8 people renting, and the going rate is about $800 a month. So if you do the
right.
math on that, it's a highly lucrative situation. So it's pretty much impossible for a property owner to maintain a single family residence. And when someone sells, it usually goes to someone to operate a business.
All right. What I want to do is go back to a little some history here. And you had mentioned a Rosenwald school. Is it still there?
Okay, so we had 2 Rosenwald schools, an elementary school that is on the land that was on what is now part of the lake. So that no longer exists. The other one, it was the high school, is now Washington Brazilian Seventh-day Adventist Church, and that's on 54th Avenue. And
Okay.
it is my understanding that it is listed as a historic resource by the
That's
county.
why I sneaked it into the conversation. Now I want to turn to your family has, I think, coming up very quickly here, 3 homes and slated for historic designation. And since this is the Historical Society, I'm wondering if you could spend a little bit of time on your family history and tell us about these 3 houses.
Sure. Well, for the last for the last 20 years, I've been working with the Lakeland Community Heritage Project, and our mission is to basically to tell the Lakeland story and to share to tell the Lakeland story and to preserve materials that help to tell that. We have a digital archive and a small physical collection of materials. One of the community impact agreements with one of the new developers, LV, that'll be putting up the new property at Route 1, will allow us to have a space within that building, and it'll be called the Lakeland Legacy Center. So I hope there's an opportunity for you to learn more about that soon. But among the various ways we're trying to preserve Lakeland's story is to preserve the physical Lakeland. And we've been in conversation for some time now about the whole concept of historic preservation and designation of properties. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people are afraid of those concepts. They feel that it would be another way for someone to in some way take their property. And I guess you can understand why that is particularly challenging for a community with the history of Lakelands. After, thinking about this, I thought about, what really makes a property significant historically. I think it's the story that you can tell using the space. Oftentimes we think about history as being that of the great person. You have the great American, George Washington, you talk about Sojourner Truth, you talk about Rosa Parks, but there are a lot of stories that can tell the heritage of a people, and that they're not necessarily the story of the great person, the great man, the great woman. Sometimes it's the story of just the ordinary person. And so as I thought about that, and what was significant, I thought that really if we could tell a significant story about Lakeland virtually using any property within Lakeland. And I kind of tested that out um, by talking with my sister and us making the decision to try to tell the stories that our family could tell, and to use our properties to tell those stories. So we I purchased a house that belonged to my great aunts some number of years ago. The house had been in the family for, since it was built. Um, and my father, against his first wishes, helped me to buy the property from the estates of his aunts, and to do some substantial work to the house. I wasn't in good condition at all when I purchased it. But over time, we continually worked on the house, and we and I've been very comfortable living here for more than 20 years. And so we decided, well, what story can this house tell? And so we put all of that together and made a proposal um, to the commission to have the house designated as a historic property. It's being called the Nancy Tabbs House, and we used the property to tell the story of a widow who had moved into Lakeland along with some of her siblings. There, a number of them are found on the 1900 census. Her brother was working at the University of Maryland at that time. He's also found on one of the earliest ledgers that shows history of African Americans working at the University of Maryland. His their you know she was her husband, I don't know if he died or left, but he is out of the household. She was living with her daughter, and they purchased the house from someone who turned out to be a somewhat notable architect, who built the house for them. He turned out to be the second African American architect to be registered within the District of Columbia. So she used the house to build, to be able to build a life for herself and her daughter. They rented out rooms to people. After the death of Aunt Nancy, one of her nieces lived here and did the same thing. So the house really was used not only as economic support for um, women-led households, but also helped folks get on their feet. So young people would live in the house and you know until they were able to go out on their own, or folks who had grown up in Lakeland would move in and you know till they get somewhat independence from their family, until they were able to move out and make their own households. The other property that we requested designation for was that was built by my grandparents in 1970. They had lived on the site of what is now Paint Branch Elementary School and College Park Community Center. Actually, their house was on the community center site, but that whole block was taken when the elementary school was built. There were 3 houses there that belonged to the Greens, the Grays, and the Grosses. So because the house was taken through eminent domain, my father talks about the fact that the price that they were allowed for the house was not sufficient to build another house or even for them to purchase another house. So because my grandparents owned a lot already nearby, they were able to build, use the money that was allotted for the purchase of their original home to buy a kit house. And then my father and his friends finished out the house because they would, with the kit, they would erect the shell. And then all the finished work, the interior work could be done by the homeowner. So that's what my father did. He had done the same thing years before in the early 60s when he built a house for his young family, which was my sister, myself, and our mom, along with my dad. And so that home we still own as well. My sister lives there. And that house we had requested designation for. And it turns out that it was we were able to find the name of the company that he purchased the kit from. And the researchers with the commission were able to, find out about the whole, kit home concept and identify the model that he used. So that was pretty interesting too. But by looking at these homes, you're able to talk about, self-help, how women were able to earn livings given the restraints that society had for them. We're able to talk about the impact of a home being purchased through eminent domain. We're able to talk about early architect in Washington, D.C. and his work. A number of different things. We're able to talk about building community. And really, my father served as a chairman of the project area committee during the urban renewal period. I will mention the fact that in an oral history that he did for us with the Heritage Project, he expresses regret about the fact that he really trusted the government officials when they said that they would, produce a project that would meet the needs of Lakelanders, and that he was aware of what happened ultimately, and that he truly regretted any part that he had in helping that whole process take place, despite the fact that you know he was honest in his trust. Um, so I hope that explains. I don't.
No, you're doing great. I'm sitting here, just, I have so many questions, but I'm also learning so much that I think enthralled is the word. Maxine.
John Peter, we have just under 10 minutes, but at the moment we have no questions, so I'll let you keep going.
Okay. Maxine, was there a business block or district at one point in your sort of review of the history where there like local stores, a barber shop, maybe a general store or something in Lakeland?
Yes. And, a lot of this goes back to my time of living in Lakeland as a youngster, even. Of course, Rhode Island Avenue was where the streetcar line ran. And so,
did it stop in Lakeland, by the way?
yes, there was a stop in Lakeland, or,
Right.
And so right along where the streetcar line was the commercial hub for Lakeland. Prior to urban renewal, there were 2 stores. one on one side of Rhode Island Avenue and one on the other. There was Black Store and Max Store. And actually it was Max Market, and the real name of Black Store was Lakeland Grocery. And Lakeland Grocery not only had common day items, like a corner store, it also had a lunch counter with a jukebox where the high school kids would go and listen to music and dance. There was also, they had a pool table there. And there were several apartments that were attached to the store. One of the areas there, sometime later, in later years, it was an apartment, but at one point it was used as a beauty salon. There was part that was used as a dry cleaners. Over at Mac's store, there were two doors in the front of the building. One was the store, and he had a little ice cream counter there. And also the other one was a pool hall. And rumor had it that if you went into the pool hall, you could play your numbers. But you didn't hear that from me.
Okay.
And
Are either of
above there
those,
were apartments.
are
But there
any
was
of
also,
those, I'm sorry.
but there was also an American, I'm sorry, Elks Lodge in Lakeland, right there at Rhode Island Avenue. About a half a block away, there was a tavern, Lakeland Tavern, also known as the Beer Garden, also known as Brothers Tavern. So there was a thriving commercial life. There's also, there's even an old newspaper article from around 1910 that talks about a African American woman coming in from Washington on the streetcar. It's a rather insulting story, but it does talk about her coming to Lakeland for a colored feet.
Wow.
So I'm going to say that's a great way to end, because we now have some questions that have popped up. So let me just ask.
So many questions.
I know,
little
yeah.
time.
I'm going to ask the first question, actually, and I apologize for the ignorance. What are colored feet?
A feet is like a party, and colored is a term that was used for African Americans at one point.
Okay. All right. So Alan Verda has asked, how did people get across the railroad tracks from one side of Lakeland to the other? Was there a road crossing?
Yes, there was. Along Lakeland Road, there was a crossing. You can now you can go if you drive down Lakeland Road, you'll see a wall where the lake is on the other side of the wall. And so that was where the on-grade crossing was.
Okay. Pat Sluby is asking, what was the architect's name for the house you mentioned?
I don't have it in front of me. I'd have to look.
We'll get it if Donna, if you can get her email, we'll get that to her.
Okay.
Or maybe one of the commission staff people is on. If Casey's listening, Casey might type it into the chat.
Tom Gross was on, but I don't.
I'm here. I'm here, and I was busily trying to go to the staff report for the Nancy Tams house, and I couldn't. The link's not working, so we will get that answer for you. But Janet actually is on. I'm not sure, Janet, if you remember. Janet was she's our graduate intern and worked with Casey Roan on the evaluations. In any event, we will find that out.
We'll get the answer. We've got the whole team here, Maxine.
Oh, I'm a lucky duck.
If not, we'll make sure that we can get the answer to Pat Sluby. Let's see. Oscar Gregory is asking, what year is the oldest house in Lakeland?
To the best of my knowledge, it's like right around 1890.
Okay. Leslie Montrell is asking, can you talk a little about the Lomax family, their house, and his term as mayor?
Their house is next door to me. It's still there. Originally, they lived on the east side of the railroad tracks, pretty much across from Lakeland High School, which is now the Brazilian Seventh-day Adventist Church. Derby Lomax was a city council person for a very long time. He was mayor. He was the only African-American mayor to serve in College Park. Oh, no, up until until the very recently, Denise Mitchell was mayor, sort of, after the unfortunate incident with the Patrick Wohan. But he was mayor. He was a city council person during the urban renewal period. He also served city council for like 6 months when I resigned from council and left town for a short period of time.
Okay, so we've got the architect's name. His name was Romulus C. Archer Jr. So it's in the chat if anybody wants to see the spellings. There's one more question from Ann Barrett. Did your dad build a house in Lakeland? And do you remember the name of the kit company?
Why do I think is it Swift Homes?
Yes, I
Okay.
I cheated and looked it up. It was the Capri model by Swift Homes.
Okay. And actually, he built 2 kit homes. So, well, like I said, the deal is that the company would come in, put up the shell, and then you would do all the finished work. So he did that twice. He did it with the house that's being called the Elwood and Wilmer Gross house, and also the house that he helped build for his parents, which is the George Henry and Agnes Gross house. I don't know what company the second one was from. And really the only way we were able to find out, because he doesn't remember, was that there was a lien on the property when they purchased the kit. So his parents, my grandparents, had given my parents the lot. So they were able to use the lot as collateral to purchase the kit. And so when they purchased the kit, there was a lien on the property. So that's how we were able to find the name of the company that they purchased the kit from.
Okay. So Ann Barrett also said to say thank you so much. It's been very interesting. And Oscar Gregory is getting the last question in, and that is, are there any cemeteries in the Lakeland area?
No, they're not. But a number of community members are buried in like Merkirk at United Methodist Church, Queens Chapel United Methodist.
Okay.
And other local cemeteries.
Okay. Well, thank you, Maxine and John Peter, for the chat this evening. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. Our next history chat is 1 week earlier than our normal fourth Monday. It's going to be the Monday, March 18th at 7 p.m., where I'll be chatting with Franklin Robinson Jr. about his book, Faith and Tobacco, A History of St. Thomas Episcopal Parish in Prince George's County, Maryland, plus his current research about the root parishes of the Diocese of Washington, the Episcopal Diocese, and their relationship to the enslaved population. So I hope you can join us for that one as well. So again, thank you, Maxine and John Peter. It was a wonderful presentation, or chat, I should say, and I wish we could have continued going on because it was very fascinating. So thank you, everybody, and we appreciate you joining us this evening.
Well, thank you, Maxine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.